Okay, good evening, everybody. First of all, my genuine apology for being late in the class. There was some technical issue because of what we got delayed, right? But then, of course, from the next class onwards, we'll follow the time. 5:30 is the time. Most likely, by 5:35, 5:40, the class will start, right? Okay, fine. So, look, we already had one session that is called as the orientation session for this crash course, right? And as in that particular session only, I had been talking about that what exactly we are going to do and how exactly we are going to do, what is our objective or what are our objectives, right? And how we are going to fulfill it. Probably in that class itself, I've been very categorically telling you one thing: when it comes to upgradation of the content or enrichment of the content. Now that sounds quite lucrative, but then at the same time, you need to know one thing very practically, that at the end moment, if you pile up lot of content, in that case you won't be able to produce them in your answer script. That you should always keep in mind, right? And by keeping even that in my mind, I won't try myself to pile up great amount of content. Rather, there are only few things we are going to focus upon, right? What are those things we are going to focus upon that I had been discussing even in the last class also? I'm repeating the same thing once again. We will go for a sort of a quick revision of the things what I believe that you must be knowing. Why you should know all these kind of things? Because if you are expecting to write the means of 2025, I believe that you have gone through the syllabus, and that's why some common content, right? Or some basic concepts, I believe that you all are having that content, and that's how we won't waste much of our time in this particular part. Rather, I'll go for a quick revision, and then I'll finish it. So where exactly we're going to focus upon then, we are going to focus upon first some conceptual dimensions. Specifically, that depends on basically the portions, whether we have been doing ancient, medieval, or modern, or world. It depends on that, because when it comes to ancient India, concepts play very important role, and that's how while doing it, I'll be focusing on that. While doing the medieval India, we'll focus more on the peripheral part of history, right? Well, when it comes to the modern India, that also I have discussed, in modern India, we are going to somehow somehow focus on those minor dimensions. And while doing so, right, while doing so, I'll keep on telling you that while writing the answers, what are the things that you should definitely produce. And at the same time, I would like to I would like to bring you out from those popular misnomers or the confusions which are there for the subject. The way I've been discussing, if you are making some map or drawing some map, in that case you can giving an edge to your answer. So these are the misnomer, these are the misconception. Very frankly, I'm telling you. Of course, if utility is there, if relevance is there, you can make it in the same way, the way you had been you always talk about that how many historians you write in your answer. That is also giving an edge to your answer. And in fact, if you have been mentioning so many names of historian, you are getting more marks. All these kind of things are rumor. Actually, you should write the name of historians. Again, that is depending very much on the nature of questions. But at the same time, it's not needed that you have been writing the name of so many historians. Rather, you should try to mention one or two historians. I'll also try to discuss that where exactly this should be mentioned, whether this should be there in the introduction part, in the body part, or in the conclusion part, whether you should frame the answers in a very subjective manner or objective manner. These kind of things also will keep on including in our lectures. So that is how in different part of our syllabus we'll keep on focusing on different areas, and that's how we'll be covering it. At the same time, as I was discussing about historians, and I think you remember in the last class itself, I was telling you that instead of writing so many historians which are not very relevant in the current scenario, we'll try to get certain historians, right? And in fact, topic wise, maybe one or two historians which are more practical, which are more relevant. So I'll simply tell you, okay, this is one name that you should remember, and while writing any answer on that particular topic, just mention this particular name. That is it, right? So these are the things we are going to focus upon. That is how we are going to cover this syllabus. And we will as I did tell you that we'll try to finish it in 20 classes. But then if one or two class exceeds, in that case, that is quite okay. I think you should be okay with that. So this is how we are going to do this value in value addition, or let's say the content enrichment, right? So it is a sort of combined program which is focusing on slight revision, slight updation or content enrichment. So we'll try to do everything within those 2022 classes. Fine. So now, these kind of things we had a sort of conversation on these things even in the last last session also. But now here we have to here upon here onwards we have to focus upon the content, right? So let's come to the content, and in fact we are going to start with the first topic of your syllabus for from the paper 1 part A, that is ancient India. So we are going to start with the ancient India. So let's come to the ancient India. So okay, fine. So, what is the first topic from where we have to start? So, that as you all know, that the first topic has been given in your syllabus is the sources. And in fact, if as far as this particular topic is concerned, there are few things you should you should observe very carefully. What are they? When it comes to the sources, right? Sources are very important in paper one, and in fact, there are two relevance of sources. That I'm telling you very categorically. What are these two different relevance of the sources? So the first thing, that there are certain questions, there are certain questions, they are directly based on sources. But at the same time, you can find that in rest of the questions, specifically this I have been discussing in paper for paper one. For the rest of the questions, you should try to include the name of couple of sources while writing the answers of anything. Because if you have been adding the name of the sources, in that case, ultimately you are in a condition to get better marks. That's how there are two different kind of utilities of the sources. So what we are going to do in this particular session, first we'll talk about basically the questions directly coming from the sources, and then we are going to focus upon how to incorporate the sources in your answers, right? That is also one aspect I'll try to discuss about. So basically, when it comes to the sources, as I did tell you that the questions are coming from the sources on regular basis, right? Though in last few years, questions have been asked in the lesser manner. For last 2 years I haven't seen any questions directly being asked on this. ये हटेगा ऊपर कैसे slide जाएगा? Okay, fine. So first of all, when it comes to the sources, there are different kind of sources which are there, and among them, as you all know, that we talk about the literary sources, archaeological sources, and at the same time we can talk about the foreign accounts. If you'll see the syllabus, in that case you'll find that there are multiple things they have already written in the syllabus, right? What are they? Archaeological sources, and the words that they have used: exploration, excavation, epigraphy, numismatic, monuments. When it comes to literary sources, they have mentioned indigenous, right? Primary, secondary, poetry, scientific literature. It has been literature in the regional languages, and religious literature. Now, one a pattern that you can observe here, that when it comes to the UPSC questions, now instead of asking very popular dimensions or the regular dimensions, you can find that they have even started asking questions from those topics which are not very frequently being asked so far. And that's why am I telling you, because in the recent times you'll find that they have started asking questions on the scientific literature, like regional literature, regional languages is being incorporated by them in their questions, right? But yes, so instead of asking very typical kind of questions, typical kind of questions, that how come the literary sources are, how come the inscriptions are being used for writing history, how come the literary sources are being used for writing history, they're not asking this kind of typical or traditional questions. Now they have started being bit innovative in that side, and that is the reason because of what you need to be you need to study this particular part bit minutely. ठीक है, थोड़ा छोटे छोटे dimensions पे भी थोड़ा focus करना पड़ेगा. Fine. So if you'll see the questions from these topics. So let's see some couple of the questions. So there are certain historiography based questions. Historiography as in how come Itihasa Purana reflect the historical tradition? Like 2018, this question was asked. Discuss the changing approach to the study of early Indian history. That's a very old question. Now they have stopped asking these kind of questions, so we should not pay proper attention to it. Archaeological sources. The last question has been asked in 2019, 6 years back. And the question was, do you agree that the archaeological evidence often help us in better understanding of literary sources? Now, these kind of questions are also very innovative questions, and we will have a discussion over this also. And then 2017, 2007, questions were there from the sources. Literary sources, again, how far can the ancient Indian Shruti literature be used as historical source? In 2015, they asked this question. Evaluate the contribution of the Puranas in disseminating the secular knowledge among masses in ancient India. 2013. 2022, like they asked one question on foreign accounts, like on a regular basis, they ask questions on this also. And there are certain questions which are not directly coming from the sources, but they have been taking the references of the sources, and they have been like asking you directly that you write this the answer of this particular question on the basis of certain contemporary sources. This is what I had been trying to discuss like just now, just now. So such as critically evaluate the theory and practice of land revenue system in ancient India. This is land revenue system in ancient India. I think something is missing here, like some additional parts were also there. Yeah, for the copious reference to the preservation of Varnasrama system by the king utilized in inscriptions are mere reflection of the Smriti tradition. Now it is asking about something else, but then it had been taking the references of some of the sources, and that's how you need to refer the sources in order to answer that particular question. Like that is how the sources are becoming very important, such as on the basis of contemporary sources, X is the nature of banking and usury. So the question is based on the banking and usury, but then on the basis of contemporary sources. So of course, in these kind of questions, they are expecting that you do mention some of the some of the relevant sources which are talking about the banking and the usury system. This is what they have been expecting. They evaluate the ownership of land in ancient India on the basis of literary and epigraphic sources. So that is how there are certain questions which are based on certain themes, but then they have been asking categorically to refer the sources, and you can't write the answer of these kind of questions without referring the sources. That is the importance of it, right? So that's how we can say sources is undoubtedly a very important topic. So in today's class, like we are going to discuss about the sources, right? Okay, fine. So this is the topic like we are going to cover today. When it comes to just a second. Yeah, when it comes to the sources, like there is one this like you need to note down, fine. There are certain words, these are considered, or these could be called as the keywords for keywords for writing any answers specifically based on the sources, fine, such as the primary sources. So you should be very clear that the sources are basically of two types, right? What are they? They are the primary sources, right? And the second category is the secondary sources, the primary and the secondary sources. Just a second. Okay, primary and the secondary sources, these are two different kind of sources which are there. So what are the primary sources? The sources what we study, specifically the archaeological sources, the literary sources, the foreign accounts, they have been kept in the category of the primary sources. What are the secondary sources? On the basis of the primary sources, when certain books were being written, they were kept in the category of the secondary sources. So this is least concern, like we should be least concerned about this, because these are like this is the thing which is being called by you as historiography. So that we will keep in the category of historiography, but then the primary sources we are going to like emphasize here. So you should be quite conscious of this thing, ki what is primary source and what is the secondary source. Now it is also very important in this regard, when you talk about the sources, like it is very important that whether that particular book is that particular source is falling in the category of primary or the secondary source. Like, and I'm giving you an example, such as when you talk about Kalhana's Raj Tarangani. Now, that question will be asked to you, that whether it should be kept, whether it should be kept in the category of primary sources or the secondary sources, because Kalhana had also used like a couple of sources. They're like 50 years, like 50 years for those years, which is the third part of Kalhana's Raj Tarangani. In this particular part, he had used his own experience to write about, to write about basically the history of that period. But when he writes about the previous period, and in fact, there's one period which could be called as the epic period, then there is one period which is the historical age, and Kalhana is mentioning about that period on the basis of couple of sources. So in that case, why could not be why could not we keep this particular source in the category of secondary source? So you should understand, but then we always use Kalhana's Rastrangan as the primary source. So I'm just telling you that these kind of complicated questions may be asked to you. So basically you should be very careful of one word, that is primary sources. What is artifacts? Any man-made thing is called as artifact. While writing any answer on the archaeological sources, this word is quite helpful. Manuscripts, right, when they had been writing something on not on paper, rather on some other sort of objects, the manuscript is the term used for it. Chronicles, basically you understand what is chronicle. Epigraphy, you understand the study of inscriptions. Numismatic is a simple word. Archaeological sites, excavations. Oral tradition, right, such as when you talk about Kalhana's Rasta, to a certain extent it is based on the oral tradition also, right? So you should use these kind of words, terms, terminologies in your answers. Now dating is a very important word that can be used while writing the answers, because the moment you talk about the problems which are there in the literary sources, frankly speaking, dating is one problem. We'll use these kind of terms while seeing the content. Then contextual analysis, that is again very important word. You'll keep on noting these terms, as I did tell you that these are very important words, and you should try to incorporate these terms in your answers, right? Dating, okay, fine. Yeah. So dating, right? Contextual analysis. What is contextual analysis? Whenever we refer any source, we should always keep in mind that we have to always do the contextual analysis, that in which particular context that particular source has been generated, or that particular book or manuscript has been created. And that is how contextual analysis is one term that you should definitely include while writing any answer on the sources. Then authenticity or the validity is another term. Interpretation is very important, because whenever you talk about any classical literature or ancient literature, specifically with the literature, and to a certain extent even for the archaeological sources also, interpretation is very important. So when it comes to when it comes to basically any literature, let's say you have been talking about the Brahminical literature. Now the point is that the Brahminical literature, whatsoever Brahminical literature are present with us, now they were being written by some Brahmins, right? That is the context of it. Since it is being written by the Brahmins, so you should understand that there are certain biases, there must be certain biases, there must be certain lacunas. At the same time, so it was written for a particular crowd, because at that point of time literacy was not so so widely spread, and that is how they have been targeting a particular crowd or a section of society. And that is the reason, because of what the interpretation is very important. If I'll try to explain it more, let's say if you find some sort of reference of the caste system, or let's say Varna system, in any Brahminical text, in that case you should always understand that the Brahmins had been writing about the caste system or the Varna system, and that is how they would be definitely trying to justify it. That would be a common pattern. But you should understand that the whatsoever is being written by those Brahmins in those kind of texts, it is not necessary that exactly how it was applicable into the society. Maybe there was a different version which was being followed. Maybe it was not really like that, the way it had been explained in those classical texts or the Brahminical text, right? If the same thing is being discussed in a Buddhist literature, in the Buddhist literature, in that case, again, there might be different interpretation, because Buddhism had been challenging Brahmanism. And that's how it had been regularly criticizing all those institutions which were being promoted or endorsed by the Brahmin. And that's how the perspective would be very different. This is the reason, because of what interpretation does play very important role. In the same fashion, I can give you some certain examples of the archaeological sources also. So whenever you talk about the archaeological sources, you should always understand one point very carefully, that archaeological sources do not speak anything by their own, right? In fact, these kind of questions can be framed also. So they do not speak anything by their own. So basically, the archaeologists let them speak, and that is how interpretation becomes very important. Let me tell you one example, such as Mother Goddess, the image of Mother Goddess. Now as you all know that in Harappan civilization we do find the images of Mother Goddess, that too in large quantity. And in fact, a simplistic interpretation has been given for it. Yes, Mother Goddess was a common practice among the prehistoric cultures, and that is why it is quite possible that the even Harappans were worshipping the Mother Goddess. But then, since that image itself is not saying anything, and that's how historians have been giving different interpretations. such as some historians are saying, you know, the number is so huge or large that we cannot say it had some sort of religious function. The way it is discarded, right, and huge number is discarded, that also emphasizes on this point, like it was not being used for some sort of, like, you know, some sort of religious use, and that is nothing but, like, you know, interpretation. You can talk about the Pasupati image seal, like, you know, that seal is also being used, like, you know, being interpreted by the archaeologists in a very different way. When John Marshall is talking about that particular seal, he simply says the primitive Indians, like, you know, or the primitive Indians had been worshipping Shiva. It was very common among the among the Indians, right? Primitive Indians. But then it is not being accepted in the, like, you know, by the modern historians, or the historians those who do not agree with this particular point. And that's how interpretation does play a very important role even in the archaeological sources, right? Limitations is a very simple word. Bias, I had been using, like, you know, this word very frequently even now also. And what is this, like, you know, what is this bias? You know, there are different kind of biases, right? So when, let's say, we are referring any particular literary source of the ancient times, there may be some sort of biases in that. When the historians are giving their own interpretation, biases are even there. So you can understand that whenever it comes to, like, you know, using any archaeological source or the literary source, bias is a term which is very frequently it should be used, and that's how you should incorporate this particular term in your answer as well, right? Perspective, more or less, this we have already discussed, like, you know, what is, on what perspective or with what perspective somebody has written, that it really matters. Comparative analysis, this is very, like, you know, important term. And in fact, like, you know, this you should develop you should develop this habit of using this word very frequently. Now, what is comparative analysis? In fact, I'll give an alternative term for it, and that is juxtaposition. In fact, whenever you have been writing any answer on the sources, let me tell you one thing very categorically, you should, like, you know, uh, you should definitely include this particular word in the conclusion part. Let's say you have been writing any answer on any source, like, you know, any source, like, you have been writing. Let's say you have been writing any answer on Vedas as a source of history. So in the conclusion, like, you know, this word definitely should be used, like, you know, and how it should be used, you should simply write that there are certain lacunas with the Vedas. So that's how the Vedas could be more useful source if it is juxtaposed with the other available sources of this period. Now, if you have been writing about any archaeological source, again you should write that the archaeological sources do not speak the facts or the truths by its own, and that is the reason it should be juxtaposed, like, you know, it should be juxtaposed with the other available sources, and that's how historians could reach to a, like, you know, more accurate history. That's how you can use this word. So this is a word I've been telling you that you should develop this habit of using this word definitely in your answer whenever you have been writing any answer on the sources. There are a couple of questions they have asked, like, you know, the way I did tell you that there was one year they asked this question, that how come the, you know, literary sources are helping in a better understanding of the, sorry, archaeological sources are helping for a better understanding of the, like, you know, literary sources. So whenever these kind of questions are coming, these kind of questions were ultimately looking forward to have this word from your side, that is juxtaposition. बस यही वो सुनना चाहते हैं कि आप juxtaposition आपको पता है या नहीं. So either you write the comparative analysis, but then a better word is there, that is juxtaposition. So why not to use this particular word, juxtaposition, right? Corroboration is also very simple, like, you know, similar. Cross referencing is also very similar. So this is how, you know, these are certain terms that you should try to include in your answers, because while writing any answer on the sources, that can somehow make the quality of your answer better. That could be more impressive if you have been using these kind of words in your, either in your introduction or body part or the conclusion. That's how you can make it better, right? Okay, that's all about this particular part. Nothing else I was supposed to discuss. These are certain keywords. Now let's enter into basically the content, the sorry, the core content of the sources. Okay, fine. Let's start it. Okay, look, when it comes to the sources, this you already know that what are the various categories, ठीक है? So one category is basically the literary sources, right? Within this literary sources, you can find the sorry, religious, right? And then you secular. When it comes to religious, you know about Brahminical sources, then the Buddhist sources, and then Jain sources. Fine. In the secular category, there are numbers of texts such as you can talk about Arthasastra, you can talk about Indica, and in fact, there might be so many examples, right? So we are not going to waste much of our time here. Okay, fine. Then that is one category, that is literary sources. Then it comes to the archaeological sources. In the category of archaeological sources, the words what they have used is the monuments, right? The second word, right, that is inscriptions, or let's say epigraphy, and the third is numismatics, right? These are the various sources what we basically use, and which are basically being used for history writing, right? So when it comes to all these things, apart from this, there's one more category, that is foreign accounts. I have been writing it here, foreign foreign accounts. Okay? So these are the various types of sources. Now let us first understand that where exactly the possibilities are there of the questions. Undoubtedly, when it comes to the Brahminical sources, there are possibilities from the Brahminical sources, or possibilities of the question from the Brahminical sources. And in fact, in this particular part, you can find that some questions can be framed within the Brahminical sources, because Brahminical sources can be divided into multiple parts. I'm not getting into these kind of divisions and all. It can be divided into the Vedic literature, right? Vedic literature is further being divided by being divided as Shruti literature and Smriti literature. In the Shruti category, we keep the Vedas, we keep the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. And then it comes to the Smriti literature. And in the category of Smriti literature, we keep multiple sources, the Puranas are there, epics are there, Dharma Shastra is there, right? Up Puranas are there, then Upavedas are there. Then we can talk about the some other sort of writings are also there. But then I must tell you that you can expect the question not only a general question on Brahminical sources. The questions may be asked from some minor dimensions of the Brahminical text. From Buddhist texts, you cannot expect the questions, the minor question. Rather, a simple question can be asked on the Buddhist sources, right? How come the Buddhist sources are helpful, or maybe some sort of comparative analysis. There is lesser possibility of the Jan, the Jan sources, because they are unfortunately not very helpful while understanding the history of ancient India. They are more applicable in the medieval times, but not in the ancient times. Early medieval, I can accept. Yes, in early medieval, they had been contributing a lot. But when it comes to the when it comes to basically that this period, the ancient period, now it is not very helpful. Let me tell you the reason also, because of what the Jan texts are not very helpful. The reason is very simple, that the final compilation of the Jan text is coming somewhere in the 5th century, in a place called as Balabi in Gujarat. So 5th century is that particular period where we mostly believe that ancient is about ancient is about to end. That is the reason, because of what the validity or the reliability over the Jan sources is bit lesser as compared to rest of the two religious sources that we have, or religious texts that we have talked about, right? When it comes to the secular sources, I think we cannot discuss this particular part, because the secular sources are more applicable period wise. When you see the Mauryan period, in that case Arthasastra and Indica becomes very important. When you talk about, let's say, later period, post Mauryan period or Gupta period, so there we can talk about some different kind of sources which are which can be asked to you, such as some foreign accounts may be there, Wensang, Payan, then मेगा स्टडीज के ऊपर क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं. तो यहाँ से इन जन वहाँ से स्पेसिफिक किसी सोर्स पे क्वेश्चन आ सकता है. तो हम बात के टाइम पे उसको हम थोड़ा डिस्कस कर लेंगे जब हम किसी टॉपिक पे जाएंगे. अभी आई एम टेलिंग यू दैट सम स्पेसिफिक क्वेश्चंस कुड कम फ्रॉम दिस पार्ट. When it comes to archaeological sources, There are only two possibilities of the question. One is epigraphic and then numismatic. These are the two possibility, like possible questions from this part, right? Though they can mix it with the other things and they can ask a very innovative question, but then frankly speaking, this is like these are two possibilities. As far as the foreign accounts are there, so certain Greek sources are there, right? And then certain Chinese sources are there. But apart from this, they can even ask on the Sri Lankan sources or Sri Lankan, or let's say singly text. That possibility is also there. So you should be ready ki in future they can ask such kind of questions also, right? But then that is falling in the category of Buddhist literature, and that's how it could be covered from there. So mostly when it comes to the foreign accounts, Greek and the Chinese are the most important. And if we'll talk about the individual, in that case, there is no other like possibility. There's no possibility other than Indica, then Fayan and Wensang. These are the three most important one. Combinedly भी पूछ सकते हैं या comparative analysis भी पूछ सकते हैं, तो उस तरीके से लोग पूछ सकते हैं. So this is all about basically like the sources. Now let's move into the like one by one. So first we'll be getting into the next the first category, that is Brahmanical sources. Brahmanical sources. So when you talk about the Brahmanical sources, and as I did tell you that there are multiple possibilities of question from this. So let us first figure out the possibilities of the question. So I believe that the first question may be from the Vedas itself. That there is a direct question has been asked on Vedas, that what is like the utility of Vedas as a source of history. After the Vedas, you cannot find any question on the Brahmanas. Even there is less possibility of like the questions from Aranyakas and Upanishads, Aranyakas and Upanishads, but it can be asked with respect to the religious change, really religious change, or let's say changes coming in the later Vedic period. So I think it is a more it is more closely connected with the religious transformation or transition from early Vedic to later Vedic and later Vedic to Mahajanpada period. So we will talk about the significance of Aranyakas and Upanishads while talking or while discussing about the Vedic period, right? So, but possibility is that then it comes to another kind of source that is very much possible is the epics, then Puranas. Combinedly also the question can be asked. Then it comes to another important source which has not been asked so far directly, but yes, in future I find more possibility of Dharma Shastras, because the way these days Dharma Shastra has become so what to say, it has become so important. I believe that question may be asked in this like. So when you talk about the Brahminical sources, frankly speaking, these are the possible areas on what UPSC may ask question, right? Whenever you have been writing any answer, now this is something that I have been discussing in general. Whenever you have been writing any answer on the let's say sources, any source, right? Either archaeological, literary, or any specific literary source, right? Or any specific archaeological source only. Like, there is a format that you should always keep in mind. So if it is so general that it is asking you that how they are being used for history writing, in that case, a simple format, a simple sources, right? There is a simple format that you are supposed to follow here. And what is it? The format is that you should write its significance in this way, that what sort of political information we do get, what sort of economic, social, religious, and fifth is the cultural information. You keep in mind this particular format very carefully in your mind, and in fact whenever you need to discuss about basically you need to write the utility of any particular source for history writing. Now this is the format that you need to follow. So you need to prepare it in this way only कि आप अगर कोई भी question आता है, ultimately this is the format you have to follow. And in fact in this particular format you'll be highlighting all the important information which is being let's say being extracted from these sources. And along with this there is another word that you should keep in mind. uh, you should keep in mind, and what is it? It is basically the limitations. Limitations, that while using them as a source of history, what problems are there, what lacunas are there, what lacunas are there, because of what ultimately the historians are bound to use some other kind of sources, or they're bound to juxtapose some other sources. So that's how you need to know about the limitations also, right? So if you'll try to fit the content that we have, try to fit the topics or the themes that we have just talked about, so in that case we can see it here only, right? Just a second. Okay, I believe that when it comes to writing answer, on one by one, let's talk about the sources. ठीक है, हम एक एक करके उठाते हैं. Let's say first thing that I told you about is Vedas, right? अगर आपसे ये पूछते हैं कि write about the utility of Vedas as a source of history writing, in that case you just have to produce results or produce references, or let's say content on this particular format. So basically what sort of information we do? Political information. Now what sort of political information we do get? Of course, Vedas are telling you about the tribal organizations and the leadership. You know that what is referred in the Vedas. It is talking about that how the clans were there. The clans were being led by a leader, and he was called as Gopati or Gopata. All these information. I'm not getting into this information, but then you should always keep in mind there's one thing which is very 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 important, that Vedas are telling you or giving you very good information on the transition in all these institutions. When you refer a Rig Veda and when you refer rest of the Vedas, you find that this transition is clearly visible. And in fact, Romila Thapar is that historian. You can note down the name of Romila Thapar also. She always talks about that while studying Vedas, you should always keep in mind that with the help of Vedas, probably we cannot know the exact situation, political situation of that period. But then, if you really wish to understand the transition from one period to another period, they are the best sources. So, when it comes to the political information, you should use this word that it actually tells you about this transition. Frankly speaking, Vedas are telling you about the transition from early Vedic to later Vedic period, even in the other dimensions also. But yes, in political dimension, it is undoubtedly there. When it comes to economy, you know that what sort of economy was there in the early Vedic and the later Vedic period. And apart from this, we do not have multiple amount of sources. Though we use the PGW, PGW sites, painted grey ware sites, specifically in the western UP and Haryana region, Kurukshetra, Ahik Chhatra, Atranji, Kheda, and all these Bhagwanpur and all these places. So we do use some economic sources, but then I should tell you categorically that we majorly rely. Do you know on what sources? Vedas only, right? That is the transition that you understand. Again, the transition from a pastoralist economy to an agriculturist economy, we understand through this. Okay, when it comes to the social the information, so you can write about basically the various sort of information, the transition which were happening in the society, such as in here you can talk about the simplistic society in early Vedic period and a complex society in the later Vedic period. The way the institutions like Varna, Gotra, right, and then gender institutions were coming up. That is how society was becoming complicated. That also you can talk about here. Okay, apart from that, we can talk about basically you can talk about basically some cultural information as well. Cultural information such as we can talk about the religious pattern which were there among them. I don't need to talk about that. Then you can talk about the evolution of Sanskrit, that how it is evolving, how it is transforming and the changing, right? How the religion was becoming complicated, how various institutions were being developed even in the religion, and that's how the cultural complexity is also increasing. And we all understand these kind of things from the Vedas only, right? That is what we can talk about the Vedas. Some I will discuss about the limitations towards the end, because more or less the same limitations are there for all the but yes, there is one thing that I will tell you. that if you have been writing any answer on Vedas as a source of history, then please keep in mind that there are like, two scholars that you should try to incorporate here. One is Michael Witzel. One is Michael Witzel. Michael Witzel, right? Michael Witzel is one of the recent scholars who talks about significance of Vedas in understanding cultural history of India, right? And specifically the cultural evolution, linguistic transformation, or the development, evolution of Sanskrit as a language. This is what Michael Witzel talks about, right? And the second important scholar that you should definitely talk about, right, that is Romila Thapar. Romila Thapar. I have already told you that Romila Thapar talks about the transition, and she says that don't see the Vedas, don't see the Vedas as a text which is giving you the exact. विंडो है या ऊपर है ये? ओके, सॉरी, फाइन. सो माइकल विट्जल और रोमेला थापर दो स्कॉलर्स हैं जो आपको याद रखना है. इसमें रोमेला थापर को आप मेंशन करें, ज्यादा बढ़िया है. देयर इज नो कंफ्यूजन एट ऑल, राइट? So this is all about this Vedas as a source of history, right? As I told you that I'll come to the conclusion. Sorry, the limitations. I'll come to the conclusions. I'll discuss about the limitations together. So just leave it, right? Let's get into the another important now this is what? This is epics. So far they haven't asked a single question directly on this, ठीक है? But again I must tell you that there is a possibility of questions directly from the epics also. जब आएगा तब देख लेंगे, ठीक है? लेकिन अभी मैं आपको I'll be giving you certain generic or certain general information on that, right? So okay, when it comes to the epics, ठीक है? There is a debate which is there in history, and there are certain historians, specifically of the right wing, they believe that the epics are nothing but the history books written in the ancient times. Again, I have been telling you that epics are considered to be the history. The word what they have used is itihasa, and that is how the epics are being called as itihasa. And sometimes combinedly with Puranas, it is being called as Itihasa Purana. So, Itihasa Purana is considered to be a very important section of our history. Why? Because as I told you that some historians believe that Itihasa and Purana are falling in the category, or epics and Puranas are falling in the category of the history books. They are not the mythical stories. They are not mythical. Rather, they are they are basically the history books. So that's how it is being called as Itihasa. In that case, I hope multiple kind of questions can be framed from this side. कि whether or can we consider that epics were the history of that period? Whenever I have been saying this, or UPSC is giving any such kind of question, you should always keep in mind that it is simply telling you that can we consider that the things or the events that have been mentioned in Ramayana and Mahabharata, they were real or not? Matlab, is it somehow telling you about is it telling you about certain real incidents which were happening in different time frames here, or it is basically a sort of mythical story? So that debate is there. Now, right now, there is no conclusion on this. So at one hand, the historians of right wing, they have been writing in this way. On the other hand, historians from the left wing or the Marxist scholars, they do not believe that they are the real stories. They might be having some connection with some of the events of that period, but then there are so many such limitations because of what we cannot consider that these stories were basically the real stories, right? There were several limitations. I'll come to the limitations later on. But before I come to the limitations, let us first understand what are the things that we understand. frankly speaking, if we'll talk about this, the same points you can repeat over here, repeat here also, right? Such as the moment you see, like, the epics, it tells you about the political organization. And since Ramayana and Mahabharata are not precisely coming from the Shruti age, rather they were coming from the Smriti age or the post-Vedic period, and that is how it does present a very different kind of political structure. So it doesn't talk about a very primitive kind of political structure, rather it talks about a full-fledged and developed political structure. And that is the reason because of what we find the references of the monarchical governance, the role of kingship, right? The various ministries or the bureaucrats, their roles, their functions, the warfare, the diplomacy, all these kind of things, like, we understand from there. So yes, political information we do get. Like economic information, undoubtedly they do provide the economic information. They have been telling us about agriculture, the various patterns being followed in agriculture, right? Various agricultural tools and other economic activities such as trade and commerce, these kind of things are also being highlighted by them. Okay, apart from that, we can talk about some social information, such as, like, they also talk about the varna system, right? How varna system was there, how, like, the gender relations were there in the ancient times, like, or in this particular period. So, like, that's also something which we come across through this. Apart from that, like, we can also talk about certain morality and the ethics. These are also being discussed here. So when it comes to the morality and the ethics, so we can talk about various things which are there, such as, like, Ramayana and Mahabharata is full of morality and the, like, ethics. So I don't need to discuss about that. Of course, there are so many cultural patterns are also being discussed. Cultural patterns, matlab their clothing pattern, their fooding habits, like, and so many other things, various institutions, the various rituals, the practices, religion, like, and so many things are being discussed over here. Fine. So we can say yes, it does provide all this kind of, information, and that's as a source of history, it remains, like, it remains very important. But then when it comes to, Ramayana and Mahabharata specifically, or let's say the, let's say, the epics. So basically there are certain limitations also. So there are some specific limitations, there are some in general limitations that we'll talk about, like, only once we finish this Brahmanical sources, right? So that is how we can say that yes, this is considered to be a very important source of history. And again, I would come up to the same thing what I had been discussing just now, right? Romila Thapa says it's not necessary that you consider them the true incidents. Rather, you should see to, or you should try to understand the evolution of the various institutions from Ramayana to Mahabharata and so on. That is what Romila Thapar is doing. So she tries to, like, she tries to basically understand the evolution or the birth of various institutions, right, through Ramayana and Mahabharata. On the other hand, like, there is one another scholar, like, again recent scholar, and he is called as J.L. Brockington, right? Yes, J.L. One, so I did tell you it is Romila Thapa, and C almost all giving same argument what I had discussed about the, discussed for the Vedas. But there is another scholar, Brockington. He talks about basically the literary significance. Significance. Look, as you all know, that when it comes to, as you all know, that when it comes to Ramayana and Mahabharata, this was not written in one period. Rather, they were being developed in multiple stages. Such as you might have heard, initially in Mahabharata, there were only 8,800 verses or slokas. Rather, later it became 24,000. Further, it becomes 1 lakh. And that's why it is continuously evolving. But then you should understand that the original story was very small, and further there were so many things have been added in this. So undoubtedly the way it's being added, right? So they have been following a different kind of Sanskrit, or while writing this they had been following a different kind of Sanskrit. And that's how you'll be able to understand the evolution of basically, the historical and you can note down this line also, that he discusses the historical and literary evolution of the epics, stressing their significance in understanding ancient Indian society, right? He, maybe it is not like a true story, but then it helps you to understand that what kind of society was existing in this particular period. That is how, like, he is trying to discuss. Okay, fine. So that's all about the Mahabharata. Now, moving to another part, that is again very important part, and that is Puranas. Several questions so far has been asked on Puranas. Let us discuss it in the previous slide. No, it is, let us discuss it in a new slide only. Puranas. Puranas. We won't be discussing much factual information, मतलब जिसको हम प्रोड्यूस नहीं कर सकते उसके बारे में बात करने का कोई बहुत फायदा नहीं है. Puranas say they have asked, like from Puranas they have asked many constructive, innovative, questions. So that is the reason, because of what? First of all, you need to understand certain basic information for the Puranas, that if any innovative question is coming from the Puranas, in that case, at least you'll be in a condition, or you should be in a condition to decode it, or let's say relate it with relate it or connect it with some other sort of sources. Fine. What are Puranas? The literal meaning of the Puranas is old. If we go for a simplistic meaning, it is old. But then, what is the period in which the Puranas got developed? What is the real period? Let's not write periods. What is the period? So basically, you can find that the Puranas are written from post Mauryan period to, let's say, early medieval period, right? So though Puranas are falling in the category of Brahminical literature, but the development or the evolution of this particular literature happens pretty late. So it is being composed and then further compiled in the post-modern period, and then the last Purana was written somewhere in 12th century. So it continues for a very longer period of time. So if it continues, goes for such a longer period of time, in that case, okay, there must be good number of Puranas, and that is why we talk about 18 major Puranas and numerous, like 18 major, or let's say Mahapuranas. And apart from Mahapuranas, there are certain Up-Puranas also, and they are numerous in number, right? And that is how, in a very long stretched period, the Puranas, the Puranas got composed and then further compiled. Okay, fine. Some popular Puranas are there are so many Shiv Puran, Matsya Puran, Brahmand Puran, Vayu Puran, Garud Puran. These are the various popular Puranas, right? Now, let us understand the context of it, right? In which particular context the Puranas got actually developed. Look, what happened when it comes to the religious structure of the Brahminical society. When it comes to the religious structure of Brahminical society. Now, it is considered that Vedas are the most authentic one. And what was the general perception for the Vedas? That these are the sayings of the God. Sayings of God. That's how this perception pertained, that Vedas cannot be changed or it cannot be manipulated. So there are four Vedas in number. There were four Vedas in number. They are fixed. They cannot be changed or manipulated or extrapolated further. But the point is that if you really wish to understand the religious pattern, the structure of the Brahminical society, in that case, you cannot completely rely on Vedas, even in the post-modern or the Gupta, in the Gupta period also, right? Post-modern, or let's say even Mauryan and Gupta period. Why? Because as far as Brahminism is concerned, or Brahminism is considered, right? It had been going through, the Brahminism had been going through a sort of continuous transformation, right? And why is it happening? Why was it happening? There's a very simple reason. In India, you can find that there's a perpetual process of eastward expansion was going on. and at the same time the integration of the local people or the aboriginals were perpetually happening, and that's how the society along with the religion was continuously evolving. So when it was happening, it means that the religious patterns and the cultural religious notions were perpetually changing. Such as I'm giving one example. In the post-modern period, there are certain new gods which became so popular, such as Krishna, such as the Pancharatra cult, such as some other cults also became very popular. But then you cannot find the reference or the mention of Krishna in the Vedas. So the point is that the Vedas, the kind of gods which were being discussed and emphasized in the Vedas, now they are not very important in the postmodern period. Now certain new gods have become more important. The point is that where to incorporate them. So they needed a specific kind of text where they can incorporate those changes which were coming into the religion. That was the prime motive behind the writing of Puranas. Again, I have been repeating this point. If you want to note it down. I just told you that since the religion itself had been going through some major transformations or transitions, and early patterns were being discarded, and certain new patterns, new concepts, the new practices were coming, and they must be incorporated within the within the Brahminical literature in order to create a legitimacy or validity for them. That is the reason because of what ultimately certain texts were needed, and that's how the Brahmanas have decided to go for writing the Puranas. And they wanted to, they called it desperately the Puranas. They wanted to prove it is very old. That is how it is being called as Puranas, and that's how they had been proving the validity or the historicity of those new gods or the new religious concepts which were coming into the religion. That's how they had been calling it Puranas, right? They even called it the fifth Veda. Again, I'll say the same thing, in order to create the validity for this, and they have been categorically saying they are very old, that's why you should you should you should rely on them, you should trust on them. That is what they have been saying. So this is the basic concept of the Puranas, and since it is the basic concept of the Purana, and now it can help you to understand how the Puranas are incorporating the various informations, which sounds to be very much historical, and it sounds to be more historical as compared to the information what we find in rest of the Vedic literature, precisely speaking the Shruti literature. That is the significance of the Puranas. So basically the Puranas do provide us very multiple valuable information, and that's how it is important for us. Now what sort of information they do provide? So okay, you can divide them again into couple of categories. So there's one category that I'll write separately here, that is the geographical information. Fine. So Puranas, since you might have studied these kind of things in your text, that basically the Puranas are divided into 5 segments, right? What are they? Sarga, Pratisarga, Manvantaras, then Sarga, Pratisarga, Manvantaras, and then Charitas and Vamsanucharita. These are the 5 parts. ये उपिंदर सिंह में आप लोगों ने शायद पढ़ा होगा, और नहीं पढ़ा तो I'm telling you these are the 5 segments or the 5 parts of every Purana. Now what is this? Sarga matlab is, Sarga means creation of the world. Pratisarga matlab recreation of the world. Manvantara means the various yugas of Manu. And then finally comes to another thing, that is finally comes to an sorry, the Charitas, right? The Charitas is basically the hagiographies, or let's say the biography of the sages, some sages and the gods. That is hagiography. And then finally it comes to the Vamsanu Charita. Vamsanu Charita is basically the genealogies of the various kingdoms. That is the these are the 5 branches. Now since it is talking about the creation and the recreation of the world, and you might have heard this popular concept in Brahmanism, or in the, let's say, in the modern day Hinduism, that uh, over the period, or let's say the earth is going for a cyclic phase, right? Or there is a cyclic circle, there's a cyclic movement of this earth, and how it goes for it. So there is a Satyug, Treta Yug, Dwapar Yug, Kali Yug, and in the Kali Yug ultimately there is lot of sins. That's how the Shiva does the Tandava, and then finally the earth is getting destroyed, and then you see the creation of new world. So basically, this whole cycle is being called as one Manvantara. So then Sarga, Pratisarga, and Manvantara, I hope you could have understood. Now here you can even relate this with the real concept of the Puranas that I had been discussing. What did I tell you? That it was trying to incorporate the further changes coming into the Brahmanism. Now, what are these, like, how this process is being done? You will find that Vishnu was taking rebirth in every period in order to end the sins. So, in every period, in either you say Satyug, Treta, Dwapar, like, you will find that Vishnu is taking rebirth, and then he's killing the person who had been, like, who is basically polluting this earth. So he does try a lot. So who are these, like, various versions of the Vishnu, or various incarnations? Sorry, incarnations of, like, Vishnu, or let's say various avatars of Vishnu. These were basically the new gods which were becoming popular, and most likely they were basically the local cults. They were the local gods with the integration of the local communities, or parallel to the integration of the local communities, the local deities, local gods, like, they were also coming into the Brahmanism. So how to create a validity for them? That was the best way of creating the validity for them. That's how, like, these kind of stories were being framed, and that's how, like, the validity was being created for them, right? So since it was, like, the real concept, and that's the reason, because of what ultimately it does talk about some of the geographical phenomena also, or the geographical features of India at that point of time. So that's how, like, it does provide us, like, certain good information on the geographical thing, right? Okay, then it comes to one by one. Let's see. So after the geographical information, we can talk about the political information. Now, Puranas are having great historical significance. And do you know why it is having the great historical significance? There's a very simple reason. So the way you find, the way you know that the last segment is the Vamsanucharita, which is about the genealogies, right? So since it is providing the genealogies, and it starts providing the genealogies from the postmodern period, and it covers more or less, like, the period of early medieval period, early medieval as well. So whatsoever dynasties were coming, like, they had been writing about that, such as, like, for sake of example, we can take, like, a couple of factual information also, such as when you talk about the Satavahanas, right? So there are three Puranas, that's called Matsya Purana, Vayu Purana, and Brahman Purana. These three Puranas have been giving the references of 47 Satvahana rulers, and most of them are historical, because we have proved the historicity of these rulers with the help of the inscriptions what we have found. So since they're historical, and that is the reason, because of what it seems that Puranas were providing, like, the correct information for these genealogies. And it is like, I have been giving you just one example, but then we can, like, fit it, apply it for multiple other dynasties also, right? The point is this: when it comes to the Puranas, they were mostly giving it not in this way, that something has happened and they are writing about it. They always claim ki there was one term that you might have heard also, Bhavishya Purana. So in fact, every Purana claims ki at the time of those events, or let's say those dynasties, like, Puranas were not written. Rather, they were written much earlier or much before, and they have already, they have already predicted, or they have already made the guess of these kind of things, that okay, in future this is going to happen. But it is a sort of, like, very futuristic kind of text they have claimed for it. Of course, we cannot believe on that. They were very futuristic, or they were very, I mean to say, they already guessed or predicted that what is going to happen in the future. Of course, like, only after the happening of these events, they must be including them in their text. But then, since it has been providing these kind of information, and not only the genealogies, but the various events, the various, like, incidents, wars, and the other things, like, so that's how we can say, Purana seems to be a very, very, very useful, useful source, useful source for us in order to write the history. Whereas they have been providing the historical information. Most of the things, or the most of the Brahminical literature that we have discussed so far, unfortunately, nothing does provide, or no literature does provide anything which can be literally considered as historical or true incident, which is not correct for the Puranas. We can to a certain extent rely on that. जैसे बहुत सारी चीजें हैं या फैक्ट्स हैं जो हम सिर्फ इसी के बेसिस पे तय करते हैं. ऐसे when it comes to the genealogy of the Satvana ruler, it's not necessary that we do find the inscriptions of all these rulers, because by the time when they kept on ruling from the eastern side, Satvanas, now they were not issuing the inscriptions they started issuing only once, like, they are shifting their capital to the western side, Paitan or Pratishthan. Before that, they were not doing it. But then we believe that if this information is correct, in that case, the information what they have provided, which cannot be juxtaposed with the help of other sources, we believe that that might be also correct. Such as we say that Sri Gupta was the founder of the Gupta kingdom. Now again, it is the Puranas which tells us that Sri Gupta was the founder. Otherwise, we do not find any coins or the inscription that we can prove with the help of archaeological sources that it was there, or like the Sri Gupta was the founder. So we can say ki, when it comes to the Puranas, undoubtedly the Puranas had been providing these kind of political information, and they're quite a historical in nature, right? Then we can talk about certain social information, right? So since Puranas are based precisely on the precisely based on the society, that is the reason because of what it does provide us various information on the society, such as it talks about the caste, various communities, their functions, right? The various responsibilities, as I did tell you. So it has been providing information on these kind of things. That's how we can say that even for the social history, we do find some good amount of information. Undoubtedly, as I did tell you, that it is providing us good information on the culture, specifically within the culture when it comes to the religion, right? And then various practices and the practices, then the taboos, and then the rituals, everything is being discussed very categorically here. That's how we can say that Puranas provide very, very, very valuable information, and that's how out of all these Brahminical texts that we have discussed so far, undoubtedly they are considered to be the best sources for us in order to write or extract history. That is the significance of Puranas. Now the point is that if Puranas are so important, right, in that case, if we'll merge it with the Itihasas, right, or epics, so how important it becomes when we say the Itihasa Purana tradition, correct? And when I say the Itihasa Purana tradition, it doesn't mean only the inclusion of certain historical events or certain historical events. Rather, it also tries to say, when I'm saying historical, Itihasa Purana tradition, it means that there was a consciousness for history. There was a consciousness for history, even among the ancient Indians. Now, what is the context of this debate? Western scholars outrightly discard that Indians never had the sense of history. On the other hand, the Europeans did develop this sense of history from much earlier times, maybe from the 5th century or 6th century, or that was being discarded for India. On the other hand, the nationalist scholars try to prove the Itihasa Purana tradition was nothing but the historical tradition existing in India, and these were basically the books on history, right? That is how you should see it. So I hope you can understand how come the Itihasa Purana is not really two sources, or not merely two sources, rather it is a part, or they are part of a broader debate going on in Indian history, and that's how so many questions are being asked from this particular part. So that is the significance of it. Now, if any answer that you have been writing on Puranas, there is one scholar I would expect you to mention in your answer. That is F.E. Pargeter. F.E. Pargeter. Why? What does he say? So either you can start with Pargeter or you can end your answer with Pargeter. He simply says that the Puranas do have great historical value, and in fact it does provide so many such information which are true or historical in nature. This is what Pargeter is saying. So you just refer Pargeter, nothing else is right. Read it. Okay, fine. So this is another kind of text which is important, and I told you that why it is so important for us, right? Okay, let's move to another important text, that is Dharma Shastra. They have asked question before on Dharma Shastra, but straightforward nahi पूछा. Okay. Fine. First of all, what is Dharma Shastra? So, Dharma Shastra is not a single text. Rather, Dharma Shastra is basically the combination of few texts. And it's the combination of which sort of text? It is the combination of the Smriti literature. Sorry. Yeah, I was writing correct. Smriti literature. But it is not the Smriti genre. It is the text which is precisely known as the Smriti literature, such as Manu Smriti, Narad Smriti, Yagvallik Smriti, and so on. Right? There are so many Smritis. So it is like including that. Then it does include the Sutra literature. Now, Sutra literature means Dharma Sutra, then Griha Sutra, Srauta Sutra, and Sulva Sutra. Now these are the various sutras which are there, right? So Dharma Sutra, Griha Sutra, Srauta Sutra, and Silva Sutras. So these are the various kind of sutras. Now every sutra does have certain specification. If you really need to understand the meaning of religion, so what is the best text to understand it? It is the Dharma Sutra. And since I did tell you that the religion itself had been going through a sort of transition, it had been going through a sort of transition. So what is the real meaning of religion? Because what meaning of religion was there in the early Vedic times, unfortunately the same meaning did not continue even in the postmodern or Gupta period. So now the meaning of religion was itself changing. So that's how now there was a more practical interpretation or the definition of religion was coming up. So if you really wish to understand the religion, so this is not the best thing. Okay? It is about the domestic rituals. Domestic rituals, right? Sat Sutra is about some public rituals, and Sulva Sutra is about basically again it is about the rituals only, but then some technical aspects of rituals, aspect of, let's say being more precise, yajnas. That is the meaning of. So when you talk about the Dharma Shastra, is basically the combination of all these literature, and then combinedly it is being called as Dharma Shastra, right? So you should understand one. In fact, there is one more part of it that is called as Nibandhas. Okay, note it down. That is called as Nibandhas. What is it? In this category, we basically keep on various commentaries, right? So you know that so many people had been writing commentaries on some of the some of the ancient classical texts. That is this is that's the reason because of what it is also being incorporated here. So Dharma Shastra is the combination of all these things. So since Dharma Shastra is the combination of all these kind of things, so it's quite easy to understand. In that case, it must be providing several such information which are of greater use of history. Specifically, which sort of history? The social history, right? Now, if we'll try to apply that, how Dharma Shastra is considered, or Dharma Shastra is considered to be a sort of a very good source of history. So you should first understand this basic fact here, that when you talk about Dharma, when you talk about the history what you study in the present times, now it is moving slightly from the, not slightly, rather I'll say largely from the political history to other sort of history, other as in social history, the cultural history, the religious history, and so on. That is the reason because of what in last 2 decades the importance of Dharma Shastra has increased a lot in order to become the sources for history writing. So if you know the real context of this, right? If you know the real context of this, such as what is their Smriti, I missed to tell you. Smriti is basically the law books, fine, and it does provides, it does provide the references of various kind of laws, such as the laws for inheritance, the laws of marriages, the laws of separation, the laws of the transfer of power. So these kind of laws are being mentioned. So I hope you can understand ki if you get to know the penal code of India, Indian penal code, so you can understand ki what are the things which were going on in the society. So I think these smritis are the best books to tell us that what kind of society was existing at that point of time, right? So if you really wish to understand now everything in the society, so either you talk about the various social structures, right? Such as varna, then it does talk about the caste also, the various functions, the various differences among them, right? Then it is even talking about the rigidity in the rigidity or the hierarchy based caste system, caste society. So it is providing us very good information on various social institutions, specifically varna and the caste, right? When it comes to this particular text, it is providing us very good information on gender relationship, right? In gender relationship, it is providing information on various institutions such as family, such as family unit. Acha, I need to talk a little bit about this, the gender relationship. So since it was talking about the rules and regulations about the marriages, then the separation, and how the society was patriarchal, and how to what extent it was patriarchal, you can understand all these kind of things from the Dharma Shastras only, right? So basically, in order to understand the Dharma Shastra, you can understand in order to understand society of that particular period, Dharma Shastra is undoubtedly the best source that we do have for this period, right? Then we can say there are certain texts which are even giving providing us information on the political structure of that particular period. The way I did tell you that since the the public rituals are also part of it. So what were the public rituals, what was this Raj Dharma, what an ideal ruler is supposed to do? So at least we do find some references on this also, right? The legal procedure and the justice, of course, smritis were there. And then at the same time we can talk about certain economic activities, and then undoubtedly some religious activities or the religious patterns are also being discussed. So this is how we can say there are numbers of information that dharma shastras are also providing. So this is how we can say dharma shastras are very 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 important texts, at least in the recent context, right? And that's how you should be ready anytime the questions are coming from this, right? And in fact, the dharma shastras, if you see the dharma shastras, so you should also try to relate it with another thing, that they are somehow tried to present the notion of an ideal society. Correct? They have tried to present the notion, or they have tried to somehow explain that what is an ideal society. Why am I discussing about this? Because the Brahmins were trying to establish certain notions in the society, and most likely it was happening because certain challenges they might be facing from from some other communities. Because again, you should understand it as a process. Once we'll go for rest of the parts, we'll be able to understand it in a better way. But then since the integration of the local communities or the aboriginals were happening, and some were accepting caste system or varna system, some were challenging it. So basically they had been establishing that notion of an ideal society, and that's how they had been glorifying all this. You'll find this notion of glorifying all this in them. And in fact, those who were not following it, the way they were being punished, they were like an outcast, and all these kind of punishments were being done, given to them. So this is the basic objective behind it that you should keep in mind. Okay, fine. One historian you should definitely mention here if you have been writing any answer on this, and that is Patrick Olivelle, right? Very important scholar. Again, I'm telling you, Patrick, Patrick Olivelle. बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट स्कॉलर्स है, बहुत पॉपुलर है, ठीक है? सो आप जब भी आप आंसर लिखें, ठीक है, undoubtedly you should write the name of Patrick Olivelle. I've been just giving you minimal names, but then you should keep in mind these names, right? So मैंने बस 3 या 4 historians के नाम मेंशन किए, ठीक है, और अलग अलग जगह में उनकी यूटिलिटी बताई. Patrick Olivelle. अच्छा, Patrick Olivelle क्या कहते हैं? His stand is his argument is also very important. So you can even note down that he viewed Dharmasastra, Patrick Olivelle viewed Dharmasastra, Dharmasastra as a reflection, as a reflection of the practical realities of ancient Indian society. Ancient Indian society. That's it, right? Okay, fine. Now, these are some major Brahminical sources on what you can expect the questions. I just told you that towards the end, we'll talk about the limitation of these Brahminical texts, right? Let's talk about the limitation one by one. They are very simple. It's not very complicated. So, what problems are there? Like, there's one problem is there with respect to age. We cannot fix the exact age of any Brahminical text, right? We cannot fix the exact age of any Brahminical text, not even Vedas, epics. ठीक है, epics के बारे में हम बात कर भी रहे थे. In fact, even Vedas are very frequently being manipulated, extrapolated. This is another word like that we'll use further, right? So that is the reason because of what there is a problem. Problem in fixing the age. If we cannot fix the age, in that case, how come we can extract the history of any particular period? Because the society does not remain same. In fact, the polity, economy, society, religion, like everything does not remain same. So it is changing. So now question is that how to extract information for a fixed age. That is the problematic area, right? The second problem is the authorship. We cannot fix the authorship, and until and unless we know the author of that particular book, or that particular text, now we cannot really locate it while using it as a source of history. That is also one major problem. So that is also one problem, right? Third, extrapolation is another problem. So if any text is being manipulated or extrapolated, or let's say being rewritten, or let's say in one period it got composed after four centuries, 5 centuries, if it is getting compiled, in that case, how come to what extent you can rely on that? So that is also one problem. So extrapolation remains a problem, right? What next? Uh, the cyclic notion of time. The cyclic notion of time. Normally, history believes in the linear notion of time. I hope you understand it, because history में हम कभी नहीं believe कर सकते हैं कि सतयुग, त्रेता, द्वापर, कलयुग and again सतयुग. Because if again the Satyug is coming, in that case again the same institutions would revive. But then it doesn't happen in history. There is no point we are looking back. We are always moving forward, and that is why I told you the linear notion of time. So unfortunately, what happened? The Brahminical text always followed the cyclic notion of time, which is not fit for history. And if they have given references of the linear notion of time or the linear units of time, so they were so micro or so major, right, that ultimately they are not of our use. So they are not dealing with the years, centuries, or decades. They are dealing with the they are dealing with the eras, right? Or they were dealing with the that muhut kind of thing. So in the micro units of time are being used. That is not very useful for the historians. That is also one problem, right? So that is another major issue. Then biases is another problem. Undoubtedly, they would be biased because most of them were being created or being developed by the Brahmins, and that's how they have always presented one dimension or one perspective of the society rather than the other perspective of the society. That is the reason because of what they are very much biased as well. That is another problem. So these are certain limitations, and in fact, if you have been writing all these limitations, that's all. Nothing else you are supposed to write. So basically, if we'll talk about the Brahminical text, these are the Brahminical texts, and I did tell you that what are the positives and what are the negatives of this. So that's all about the Brahminical text. Let's move to then another sort of literature. That is what? That is Buddhist literature. Now, I am not going to give you the references of the Buddhist literature. You all know that Buddhist literature are Buddhist literatures are there of multiple kinds. Okay. So you know that it's being divided into canonical and non-canonical. In the category of canonical, basically the three Pitakas are falling: Suta Pitak, Vinaya Pitak, and Abhidhamma Pitak. You know the content of this also. but then there's another category that is called as non-canonical literature, and there you can find basically the Sri Lankan text, right, which is there. So some Indian texts are also there, of course, like it's not some, like, of course there's a huge number of such texts. So basically, after the birth of Mahayana, whatsoever texts were being created or being composed and compiled, they were falling in the category of non-canonical literature, such as when you talk about Buddha Charita, when you talk about Manjusri Mool Kalpa, Ari Manjusri Mool Kalpa, when you talk about the books written by Nagarjuna or Ashok or Buddha Charitra, Ashok. So these are the books which were mostly written in Sanskrit. They are falling in the category of in category of non-canonical literature. But apart from these, Sanskrit literature or the hybrid languages, the literature which got created in hybrid languages, except Pali and Prakrit, right? Uh, we can also talk about the Singli text or the Sri Lankan text, right? Such as Deepavansa, Mahavansa, right? These are certain texts which are compiled in Sri Lanka. And then there are certain questions certain things you can find even in Nepal and Tibet also, such as Divyavadan is considered to be the actually the original version was compiled in Tibet, sorry, in Sri Lanka, but then that version is not present to us. So the version what we find is basically the Nepali version, and that's how it is considered to be related to Nepal or also, right? Okay, fine. When it comes to the Buddhist literature, that is a sort of brief survey of the literature. But the question is that again, if we'll try to evaluate the Buddhist sources as Buddhist literature as source of history, now source of history. In that case, there are two things. First, you have to understand. First, when you compare it with the Brahminical sources, now you find it better in multiple regards. How? So basically, whatsoever problems I have discussed with the Brahminical sources, or whatsoever problems I did discuss, or the limitations I did discuss with the Brahminical sources, they are not there with the with the Buddhist sources, right? So when you talk about the problem of age, right, it is not there with the Buddhist literature. Why? Because most of the text we can locate in the exact period, such as about the first Buddhist sorry, the first Buddhist council, Sutta Pitaka and Vinaya Pitaka, right? So it got compiled. Then even the other texts, like Buddhist texts, got compiled in a particular period, and we know the exact age of it, right? And it was not being compiled by so many people, right? Sorry, like that should we should discuss here. The problem of the authorship is also not there. Even Sutta Pitaka, Ananda Nepali is contributing in that, Abhidhamma Pitaka who is contributing in that, right? And rest of the literature too, we know very perfectly that who has written it. Like we know the exact name of the author, and that is how we are quite okay. We can understand it that the well, we can exactly locate the context of that particular book. That is also there. Extrapolation is also not there, because since beginning it is there in the compiled form, it is not there in the composed form. That is why since beginning it is being compiled, so it was not having or using any language or script which they did not know, like Sanskrit, because they had been Sanskrit was merely a dialect, so they did not know how to write Sanskrit, and that is the reason because of what majority of the Brahminical literature, specifically the Shruti one, was there in the composed format. They were not there in the compiled format. That is the significance of it, right? That is not true for it. This is also not applicable. Okay. The cyclic notion of time also they do not follow. Why to follow the cyclic notion of time when they had been following the linear notion of time? In fact, I should tell you categorically that the birth of Buddha is considered to be one of the landmark event in history, and in fact majority of the events were being traced with the help of this Buddha's birth. That is the reason because of what we know the exact age of the Buddha's death, birth, and all these kind of things. So that is that is the reason because of what they had been following this notion of time. Now when it comes to biases, undoubtedly it will be also biased, okay? Because the way they had been targeting Brahmanism, so in that case they must be they must be targeting Brahmanism, and that's how they would be biased in multiple places. Now the limitations of the Brahminical sources are the beauties of the Buddhist sources. That's how the questions may be asked to you in this way also, that to what extent you believe that the Buddhist sources are far better than the Brahminical sources. The questions may be framed in this way also, so you remember that information also. When it comes to though this kind of question won't come, but even though if like this question is coming or this kind of question is coming, that what information we do get from the Buddhist sources. The format is again very simple, right? The same format we are supposed to follow. So what like information we might get from it? Again, it's very simple. So we do get the political information. I think I no need to tell you because you must be having so much information. The kind of closeness they had with the Mauryans, with the so many Mahajanpada rulers, like Ajat Satru, Chandragupta, not Chandragupta, Ajat Satru is there, like then Asoka is there. So वो कहने की बात नहीं. Undoubtedly they had great amount of closeness with like ruling dynasties. Why? Because the relationship of patronization was there. They were always looking forward to get patronization from the rulers. On the other hand, they had been helping the rulers to get legitimacy. That is the reason because of what's like a give and take relationship was there. So if this kind of relationship is there, in that case, undoubtedly they'll mention, they'll discuss about this. That is how like we find the political information. Then it comes to economic information. Now this is again like we can discuss it in the same format. Since they had been looking forward to get patronization, Buddhist monks and the institutions, they had been looking forward to get patronization even from the let's say the merchants, like the guilds and so on. That is the reason they had great amount of closeness with them also, and that is the reason even the Gehapatis also you can talk about Gehapatis, Sethis, all these bodies and institutions, and that's how they had been providing ample amount of information on economy. Agriculture, they had been providing for agriculture, they had been providing information. Trade, since they were pretty close to the traders, why? Because they had been continuously traveling with the traders. That is the reason because of what they were providing information on these kind of things. So we find very accurate information on the accurate information on basically the economy of that particular period. That is like the significance of it. Well, social. So since Buddhism to a certain extent was a social movement, was it was a social movement because it had been countering the society what the Brahmanism had created, and that's how it does talk about the caste system, varna system, the gender biases and everything. So it does provide information. Yes, certain amount of biases are undoubtedly there, but yes, it is undoubtedly they have been talking about it, right? Then after society, we can talk about the cultural information. So the way the other texts were providing cultural information, in the same way, even they are also providing the information, cultural information, cultural information. So this is how we can say that Buddhist texts are somehow far better than the Brahminical sources. ठीक है, एक और चीज है जो मैं लिख सकते हैं कल्चर के अंदर आएगा कि how come the languages were developing in India, that also we understand through this, right? So this is how we can talk about the significance of the Buddhist text as source of history. Undoubtedly, it also does have certain limitations, but the lesser limitations are there as compared to the Brahminical sources, such as sometimes some chronological ambiguity is there because several sects were emerging in by Buddhism. Some sectarian biases were also there. I have already told you that they were also biased towards towards Hinduism, sorry, towards Brahminism, and at the same time they were quite sympathetic to Buddhism. That is the reason because of what they had been sometimes misinterpreting or they were providing wrong information for the society of that particular period, right? So that's how you can talk about that Buddhist sources are undoubtedly one of the best sources available to us, and that is the reason because of what for doing a research on ancient India right now it becomes compulsory for you that you learn Pali or Prakrit in order to read the the sources. One more thing that I should not you should not skip, that when it comes to the writing the history of the subaltern, so writing the subaltern history, matlab the history of the common masses, jatka or this kind of literature becomes quite helpful. And while writing the history of subaltern people in ancient times, no source is better than the Jatkas. And that's how Jatkas have emerged in last 2 decades as one of the best sources of ancient India. That is the significance of it, right? Okay. So now when it comes to mentioning certain historians here, so there are two historians I would refer here, right? Just note down their names and that you should incorporate. One is the Reyes Davids. Reyes Davids. This is one scholar. Okay. Now he says he talks about the historical authenticity. You can now note down this also. That Reyes Davies argued that Buddhist texts are having the historical authenticity. It means that they are more reliable sources than the Brahminical sources because they do provide the most authentic and historical information rather than the mythical information, right? And that is true also that they have been mostly dealing with the historical events. Fine. On the other hand, okay, there was another scholar. That scholar is Gregory Sopen. Schopen. Gregory Sopen. Now he criticizes the historical reliability of the Buddhist sources. He says that there are several problems and the lacunas are there, and that's how we cannot rely completely or altogether on these sources, right? So this is like how we can talk about this Buddhist sources. So as far as this literary sources are there, these are the things that we can talk about, for the literary sources. So I won't discuss about as I told you uh, the secular sources, where the secular sources will try to emphasize along with the periods or the dynasties. But when it comes to other sort of sources, archaeological, I don't believe that there is something new to tell for the archaeological sources. The same format should be followed. If inscriptions you have been doing, what political information, economic information, social, आपको बस ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा क्या चाहिए, कुछ एग्जाम्पल चाहिए उनको लिखने के लिए, नथिंग एल्स यू रिक्वायर. Same is applicable to the numismatic or the coins as a source of history. Yes, some complex and critical dimensions are there when it comes to the sources. So that we'll be discussing in the next session, right? So in the next session, we'll be discussing about some more complex and the conceptual ideas for the sources and how to frame the answers, what kind of new innovative questions are possible. So that I'll highlight in the next class. So if somebody is having any question, you can ask me. If anybody is having any question, you can ask to me. Otherwise, we'll meet tomorrow. I guess no. So thank you all. Thank you very much for joining the session. Let's meet tomorrow and we'll continue it. Thank you.